Hello everyone. Today we are going to look at how to use the Okta APIs using the Postman. In our last video, we have checked how we can create the users, assign them to the groups, assign applications to the users directly or via the groups. Today we are going to look at how to get the Postman collections from their Okta website and how to run them in our Postman and how to configure the security related tokens and how to configure the parameters and what are the attributes we have to use to perform certain operations. To demonstrate that, today we will check on users API and groups API, how we can create the users with password, without password, and some other life cycle operations of the users, how we can expire the password, how we can activate the users, how we can delete the users, and at last we will check what are the required permissions to be granted to consume for the particular APIs. I mean, like when we use the API token or when we create the API token, what are the admin users or what are the admin rights it should be granted to those API tokens. Let's begin. If you look at these are the users we have created directly from this console using the add person and performing some of the operations on the UI itself to change the statuses and everything. We will be looking at the same thing via the APIs using the Postman. So Okta has already created Postman collections and grouped them under different collections based on their categories. Today we will look at the users API and groups API, how we can create and perform operations using the users API and how we can assign the users into certain groups using the API. So what you have to do is like click on and download the Postman collection based on your need. Like in my case, I use Postman for Mac, and I have a separate application to run it. But you are free to run it on the browser also. But I have already downloaded and opened it in my Postman collection. But the steps are simple. Just click download, and if you have already installed your Postman in your local machine, it will automatically open it in Postman for you once it is downloaded and when you click it. Um, okay, let's go into the Postman and check the users API. It's a huge list of API collections, and we'll be checking starting with the simple API, which is get user, just to see the existing user through the Postman. So let's open and see the API, what are the parameters and what are the API keys, and we have to configure. So if you see, since this is the get API, there is no body, and we only have to pass the user ID into the API and as well as the API token in the header as authorization token. To begin with, and since this is the first time we are configuring the APIs, there are certain things we have to start with. Like for example, URL is the Okta environment on which we want to run the APIs against. And let's see. So if you see, if you have logged into your Okta environment or without logging in, this is the URL or this is the Okta domain you have you are using or you want to run your APIs against. Let's use this as your URL. But here, what I'm going to do is, instead of replacing the value from here, I will be configuring the variables in the postman. I have already created one demo environment, but I haven't configured anything here. Let me configure this. Yeah. Let's see, this is configured. And before we check what is the user ID, let's see what's the API key. And let me run and see what's the response it is giving. And then we will run the API key and see the response. Yeah, so it says invalid token provided. So it's a must to pass the API token along with the request because these are the sensitive information we are storing inside Okta, and those should be protected. And how they are protected? Using the API tokens. So let's see how we can create the API token. So API tokens can be created under security API tokens. And I have already created one API, but I have uh, um I'm creating a new one to demonstrate here. Uh, uh, Name. I'm naming it as demo API token, create token, and here it's showing the token value. And please remember to copy the value and keep it somewhere uh, safely. Like for example, you can for temporary use case, you can just copy it in your text file and use it. But if it is in your organization, if you want to store it, like store it in a secure place, like such as AWS Secret Manager or any other secret store. But note this: if you close this window, there is no other way to copy the token. You cannot see the token again. So make sure that you copy the token and configure it. Add a new variable and set the value. Scope, I'm setting it to demo environment because I'm configuring everything under demo. Yep. So let's trigger and see. And the previous unauthorized error was gone, and now it's saying user not found because we are not passing the proper user ID. And in order to copy the user ID, or like which user we want to view, like for example, open this. Let's look at this test user at mailinator.com from the APIs. Like if you see, this is the profile, and like username, first name, last name, email ID. That's all. So let's see whether it's we are able to retrieve the same user details. And for this also, I'm setting inside the environment variable. Oops. Yes, let's trigger and see. Yes, here this is returning the user attributes, and you can see first name, last name, test, and user 3 is returned, and the login ID email is test user 3 at mailing.com, same as the values we saw it in the UI. So it's the same exact operation, but it has additional functionalities or facilities as well. It also provides the link. Um, to perform other operations against the user. If you can see, we can perform some operations against this user just by clicking on these buttons. The same thing we can be done via the APIs as well. And these are the links or API endpoints to use. Like for example, if this is a get API, is just the URL we have to use, and some of them post APIs, and we have to pass the body along with the API call with the relevant attributes. Yes. So here, one thing I want to highlight here is like when we call the API, we use the login ID as the query param. But if you can see into the other APIs in the response, those are having the user ID field, like which you can see from here. This is the ID field mentioned in the other APIs. In all Okta APIs, other than the user's collection, we must pass the ID value if we want to perform any operations for a particular user. Only users API is the exception. Users collection is the exception that we can use the login ID as the user ID. But even though it mentioned the ID here, we can alternatively use the login ID. But it's a good practice to use the uh, uh, user ID in all the APIs. Okay, so let's look at how we can create the user. So to start with, we will create the user with the credential, with the password. So first name is Isaac. Brooke is the sample request they have provided. And let's go with the myelinator suffix. Sorry, this is not showing me. So let me directly add the uh, values. Myelinator.com. Save this. Close this. Yeah. So since I have some other users created with the same name, let's do some other name. One as the email and login field, and for the password, I'm going to use a common some random password generated. Why I'm typing a random password is Okta has by default enabled some password validation that we should not pass any commonly used password, so that like it's easy to be breached, right? So we should use a secure password. So I'm using some random string for the password, and you also can hide mark this as secret to hide the password. So some secret or sensitive information from here. Okay, let's trigger and create the API and create the user using the API and see. Yeah, so it gave me 200 success response with the first name and last name as I mentioned here, and the email and login ID field same as what I mentioned here. You also can see the console from here to see what are the APIs I'm using. And Yeah, so here one thing, like here I have created it as activate false. And Let's see what are the values, what are the, what is the status of the user after created in Okta. Okay, so if you see the status is staged instead of active because I have passed activate false. Uh, this is why we do create the users with a staged state instead of the active state. Is like in certain cases, some organizations like we may need to create the users, but after creating various other background activities to be completed, like giving some permissions or some manual processes or anything. So until then, we block the user from logging in. And once we make the user active, then the user will be able to log in. So let's see uh, whether the get user is giving the exact same response as what we created the user. So now the login ID is this one. So let's replace the login ID or user ID. Save it. and trigger the get user. Yes, we can see the same information as we created. The get user is also giving the exact same values. So how we can activate? So let's look at make use of this API to see how we can activate. So here the activate URL itself is given. So when we open here, uh, mark this as post because it's mentioned as post, and um, remember the API token we have to send it in the headers because these are the existing postman collections and all the variables are configured, but this is the new one we just added into the postman like just by clicking from here. So we have to um, uh, add the header values. Let's activate and see. Oops, sorry. This is authorization header. Sorry, this is the temporary API. I'm not going to save it here, and let's run from here and then discard. So now the response is 200, and I'm going to get the user again and see whether the state has changed. We can rely on this response as it mentioned that we are activating the user and 200 response is already returned, but just to make sure the changes or just to verify the changes, let's do the get API. And yes, this status is active now. So now let's see how we can create the user without the credential. In certain cases, we create the users from the user information, but password should be given by the user him or herself. Uh, uh, So we will be creating the user without the password and sending them an activation link into their email so that they can click on the link and uh, create the password. So let's try. So I'm going to copy the same details here for the matter of time, and let's do. Let's see here. This is also activate false, and I will show you how to um, activate them. So this is also created as staged, but even though it mentioned the credential provider is Okta, but there is no password created, and this is a staged user. And like I can show you in the people's tab and what is this user. So the previous user we already activated, and this user is showing as staged, and it is letting us to activate manually from here. So like when we activate the user, um, like this is changed to a password required screen, and then we can set the password and activate. Like when we set the password, like this password uh, to be shared with the user so that like when the user try to log in for the first time, they can use the current password and then update to a new password on their own. So the same thing we can try in via the APIs. So let's create one more user uh, with the same step and perform the same operation via the APIs. So this is the third user, which is in staged status, and let's activate the user. The headers I have to copy. Yep. This is authorization header. Yep, that's correct. Authorization header. And oops, my bad. My bad is the head. Trig. This is a post method, and when we trigger, this is success. But let's see. Let's see what is the current status. So this is the user ID. Save it. Get. So this is provision. Still, we cannot. The user cannot log in. But what the reason why this is like this is like because we haven't created the password for that user, so there is no way of logging in into the system using this login ID. So once this is provisioned, either we can trigger the password email, or uh, the user can do the forgot password and create the password on their own. Now, let's see whether we received an email or not. This is the mail in it. Yeah. So we received one email for the user and activate Okta account. And let's click on this. We don't do it from the API because this is sent to the um, user's email, and they do perform the same operation from the UI. But of course, we can, if we are hiding the Okta UI and everything from our domain, we can perform the same from the APIs. But this is also one of the use case. We can use the Okta's standalone UI or already available UI to perform these operations. So I'm creating some password, reset password, and logged in as the mentioned user. Okay. So now let's go and check the user. Now the user is active because the password is created. And let's look at the user from the UI. This is the Tamindistri at mailinator.com. And when we check here, this is like already in active state, and the profile and everything is already there. So now let's look at how we can add the users into groups. So I already have few groups created, but we also can create the group and add the group description and everything. It doesn't matter what name, there is no convention here because we will be performing the operations like I mentioned before. It will be through the IDs only. All the other postman collections operations will be through the IDs only, and like we can give any name with the space or anything, but the same thing we will try from the postman collection. So um, so this is to get group, and this is to list group. Let me list down and see what are the groups available, and this is an array, and we have multiple groups written. So now what we are going to do is we are going to create a group. Add group is a post API, and it also has the same authorization header with the API token, and this is the request. And let's double check whether we have the same. Yes, we don't have anything, any group with the same name. So let's create this user with the default values as they mentioned in the sample. So this is the group created, and this is the group ID. As you can see, group ID starts with 00G, and if it is the user ID will start with 00U. If you see a U here, it's a user ID, and if you see a G here, it's a group ID. And if you see A, it's an application ID. If you see O, then it will be an organization ID. So let's see how we can um, add the users into the group. So let's scan through. Yep, add user to group. So group ID. This is the new group we have created, and we are going to add the users into this group. Set variable and user ID, like as we configured at last. Let's see whether this login ID is working with the group ID. Group CP. Yes, it says resource not found. The reason is like we are no longer performing the operations against the users API. Users API means like it will start with like API v1 users, but now we are performing the operation against groups API instead of user. This is API v1 group. So this user ID must be a ID, Okta ID. So let's copy the ID from here. So I'm trying to show everything from the API itself rather than like copying the values or checking the values from the UI to show that we can perform anything from the API itself directly. So let's update the user ID with the ID value and let's send. So this is 204. So this is the success response, and um, let's see what we have inside this group. Sorry. This is the group information it has shown, and um, if we see in this response, they have provided the users endpoint, like under the group, how we can check the users. If you can see, the group ID is mentioned here, and this is highlighted here. And under these groups, what are the users? So we can check from here. I think there should be one API provided in the collection as well. See, list group members. So we don't need to if we don't know which API to consume, or if we want to construct on the fly, then we can use the endpoints from the response as well. But if we are already aware which API to consume, then we can use the one from the postman collection. So group ID we have already configured, and users is the exact same API. So it's an array, and here we have only one user, which is this user. We just configured the user ID with this and added. So let's double check the same inside the groups from the UI. So this is the group we created, and there is one uh, people. And yeah, you can see this. Yeah, I think that's all about like how we can use the APIs using the Postman. But this is not only limited to these users and groups API, but also there are tons of other API collection we can play around with. Like for example, if you can see, we have administrator roles, and API access management, how to configure the auth2 and everything, how to configure the apps, logs, inline hooks, and I will try to do a video related to the inline hooks, how we can, for example, how we can configure the password inline hooks to import the passwords into, and schema, sessions, system logs, policy, and they are also releasing some other new API collections as well into this. So one thing I want to highlight here is that about the API token what we have created. If you can see, we have created the API token from this user. What is this user? We can check from administrators and admins, and this is Tamiya test 12345, which is the super admin. Um, but super admin in the sense like this admin can perform any operation, all possible operations with Okta. Uh, and when we create the token using that admin, the token also will have the exact same power or the privilege as the admin who created the token. Uh, but like when we are configuring into various different applications or performing different operations, is the security practice that we create the users or we give the access, we give minimal access for the required use case. So in this case, let's see how we can try with different admin roles. Like there is one, um, this is the Okta documentation on the admin and their permissions. And since this is like in our use case, this is just the users and groups API, and like we are not playing around anything with the admin, playing around with the application, or we are not playing around with any other like reporting stuff or mobile stuff or MFA stuff or anything. It's just with the users and how we can play around the users with the groups and everything. So I would suggest the Oak admin will be the good fit for this. So if we create the API key with the Oak admin, I mean like we have to create the administrator, uh, create a user and grant the relevant admin permission to that particular user, and log in with that particular admin user and create the API token for that user. And for example, there is one common one like a read-only admin, like if the user or if the application does not have any right to permission to uh, update anything against Okta, and they are interested in just to see view the values or configurations or anything, then we will create the read-only admin. You can try to play around with the administrators and see like how they are verify varying in terms of their use case. But I can quickly show you how we can create administrator or assign admin role to a particular user. So let's see, we want to assign org admin to a particular user. So let's go to users tab, and this is the user I want to give admin roles to. Let's see. So click on admin individual admin privilege. Once this is selected, here choose the role. Which role we want to give the organization admin, and save changes. Once we save the changes, let's go inside the admin page. You can click from here as well and see the admins, and my name started appearing here. And we can use this user, like we know like which username and password we have used to create this user, and log in as that user and create the API token. I will upload another video on Okta administrators, especially for the API use case, how we can create the API tokens and everything. Thank you so much. If you are interested in learning more about Okta, leave me a comment so that I can um, go through, and if possible, I will try to construct uh, the videos as per your priorities or as per your request, and I can um, upload new videos in the future. Thank you.